Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Please don't look only around you in the outside direction. Concentrate for a few moments here. Also because in a few seconds the podium will be magnificently occupied by our guest of honor and speaker this evening, Sergio Marchionne. As you might know, Mr. Marchionne, dear Sergio, this is an event which Bocconi University, which is a small but promising school located in Milan, has organized in New York, and I will not mention any names of those who did for us a fantastic job in organizing this. We are deeply grateful. Has organized a moment of reflection, of course, to improve the awareness about Bocconi in the American academic, business, and institutional community, but also to develop a very open and thorough, I can say, reflection on the US, Europe, even Italy, in relation to growth. Because this is the moment where each of our countries or continents or unions did their best to come out of the crisis. Have we or have we not come out of the crisis? And of course, not only our governments, but our companies, our industries have done a lot to come out well of the crisis. And your personal and company history, dear Sergio, is something that will be studied for many, many years as a case study of trying to make good use of a crisis and good and structural use of the crisis through a further internationalization and globalization. And so we had the opportunity today to compare notes among Europeans and Americans on where we go from here. This is really, and I'm deeply grateful to you that you have accepted to honor us with your presence and with your words in a moment. This event could not have had a more appropriate conclusion than us listening to you, because you are almost Italian, you are certainly Canadian, you are partly Swiss, you are a global entity, you are American. I met you dealing with aluminum, you might remember a few years ago. I think you went even beyond that. And so you are the embodiment of globalization and of corporate turnarounds. What you did is noted worldwide, and again will be studied by historians of our economic systems. And one sees when you talk about our societies, our cultures, our politics, that you would have in your mind brilliant ideas on how to turn around also countries, not only companies. And I know for sure that those who have pro tempore the responsibility of conducting countries do turn to you to have your feelings. And so I hope that you will open yourself very, very much this evening. And I have, as my concluding introductory remark to you, a quote of yours that I'm sure you remember word by word, even though it was originally in Italian and I will present it in English. Juventus and Fiat are examples of Italian excellency in the world, and beyond popularity, they share other fundamental values. The importance of a team, the importance of persons, the ambition to aim at excellent results, the competitive spirit, and the awareness that success is never there permanently, but needs to be conquered and reconquered daily. When I read this, I said, and yet Sergio Marchionne, as far as I know, has not studied at Bocconi. But this is exactly the spirit, Sergio, that animates us, and I was feeling a bit deprived that you linked this just to Juventus and Fiat, again, to promising realities of the Italian landscape. But then, suddenly, through a bit of historical research, I calmed down and acquired serenity. Because you pronounced that on the 5th of April of 2012, but just a few days earlier, on the 30th of March of 2012, and I must apologize again that I was not there, but I had some other occupation at the moment, you visited Bocconi. And you gave a very remarkable speech under the heading of the Unthinkables, an initiative for which the Bocconi Alumni Association invited you. And I must say, beyond your many claims to glory, Sergio, I must praise you for the great rapidity with which you permeated yourself of the Bocconi values, that then just a few days later you'd have translated into the Juventus and Fiat categories. So we, and I personally, thank you so much once again for having accepted to be with us this evening to address this great audience. I thank, by the way, each of you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending one day with us, although I must admit that this evening there are slightly higher numbers. Not enormously, but slightly higher numbers than was the case during the day. But don't get too excited, our honorary speaker. And after your remarks, I know that you have kindly accepted to take a few questions, and Rector Andrea Sironi will then moderate that little dialogue and will thank you, giving concluding remarks for this great day and very great evening. Thank you very much.
Now that you wired me up, can you shut me down? Okay. As a matter of sort of administrative detail, I flew in from London at 3 o'clock this morning, and I've been on the phone for the last 12 hours. So if I sound sluggish, I want to apologize for the rendering of my remarks tonight. But as is typical in most institutions of the size of Fiat Chrysler, I did not come to this event unprepared. I do have a prepared speech, and as I was sitting in the plane coming over to New York and then sitting in the car, I was trying to find out whether I should read it to you or whether I should just speak to you. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to talk to you off the top of my head, and that I will not use my written remarks. And the reason why I'm doing this is because there is a sufficiently large number of young people in this room, and that's not to take away from Mario and the rest of the colleagues at this table. You're less young than the rest, I think. That's young nonetheless. But I want to give you sort of the benefit of my experience. I just turned 62 a couple of days ago, and as Mario said, I've been spending most of my time traveling the globe for nearly 25 years. And Mario is right. I did meet him a long time ago in Brussels when I tried to convince him that there was a merger between three aluminum companies that made perfect sense, and he insisted that we divest the one piece of equipment that made we own two presses that made aluminum foil for French cheese. And he was so obsessed with the fact that we would be dominating that market that he forced me to sell one of them. So I have very fond memories of Mario and my experience in Brussels at the time. I can only tell you that since he left, things have not gone better. So, but I wanted to talk to you about three things, because one of the things that I'm obviously asked about most is how the hell did you do what you did and why? And so I'm going to start with some answers to the first questions. And I'll stick to the topic of Fiat, which some of the Italians in this room probably know more than the Chrysler story. But Fiat goes back, Fiat is going to be 115 years old this year. And I was asked back in 2000, I joined the board in 2003, and I was asked, and I think Mario was on the board too in the 90s. Yeah. And I was asked as a result of a variety of incidents to become the CEO in May of 2004. And I'm not going to take you through the rigorous analysis that I went through. I went through a period of 60 days where I tried to, and I didn't know how to make a car. And I love cars. I love buying them. And I have bought a number of cars over the years, but I did not know how to build a car. And so I spent a long time in the field, in the plants, talking to people to try and get an understanding of what made this machine tick. And it wasn't ticking well. We were losing, at the time on the car side, we were losing about $5 million a day. That's weekends included. So it was an incredibly expensive hobby to hang on to for a period of time. And I think there was a general consensus, which was pretty well spread through the capital markets, that we would not survive. And so these are things that, I joined Fiat as a result of certainly the relevance of Fiat to my life when I was younger. I was born into an Italian family, although my mother is from Istria. And so the importance of Fiat was unquestioned. And so when somebody called you to come and save the motherland, you did, which is basically the same reason why Mario went into government, right? And so the question is, what did I do at the time? And I just absorbed information, and I came up with a plan about 60 days later that said that we were going to make about 3.5 billion euros in 2008. And everybody pretty well laughed their heads off, and I said, this guy is a maniac. I mean, he has no idea how to build a car. He has no idea how sick Fiat is, and he cannot be saved. But as part of that sort of analysis, I became fixated with this issue, and it's a maniacal fixation that I have, with arriving at what I call strategic stability of a business. And I've done this on the aluminum side, which is the reason why I went to see Commissioner Monti back in the 90s. But I do have a fixation with trying to find the right set of conditions that guarantee strategic flexibility, but more importantly, strategic stability for any business. Fiat in 2004 was an unstable environment. It was unstable not just because of the fact that it lost $5 million a day, but it was unstable because the elements that required it to survive were not present. So it did not have the mass, it didn't have the reach, it didn't have the know-how to try and compete. And I spent the last 10 years through a variety of exercises trying to find that stability. We found part stability when we convinced our friends in Detroit, the GM, to give us about $2 billion to walk away from us. And a lot of Italians were incredibly happy at the time, because I came back with $2 billion. And I keep on reminding people that somebody paid you $2 billion not to marry you. And I said, I'm not sure that that's truly a compliment, right? And I said, you're so ugly that I will pay you to go away. And I've got this image in my head of the level of disdain the executives at GM when they signed the infamous deal to pay us $2 billion. and this incredible look of relief that they had of having been able to finally dump the donkey. And so, Italians were clapping, they were cheering in Detroit, expensive cheer, but finally the nightmare was over. And what made this even more tragic from a GM story is the fact in 2009 they filed for bankruptcy if Fiat was still alive. But it tells you something about leadership, which I'll come back to in a moment, and drive. So we went through this relatively healthy period. We made all the numbers up to 2008, and then a collection of you in this room, and I got a couple of esteemed bankers sitting at my table tonight, managed to meticulously destroy the world that we lived in. And so I and a number of other CEOs of pedantic businesses on the industrial side that spent most of our lives recovering from the shock and the aftershock effects of the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. Fiat at that time was looking at a world that was drastically changing. We were no longer the weakest link in the chain. There were other people who had committed some larger sins in their quest for size and positioning. And the combination of all those errors that created instability on this side of the pond. And we effectively started looking at this back in 2008 and realized that companies such as Chrysler and General Motors ultimately would not make it. And so our conversations with Chrysler started on the basis of industrial collaboration, which is something that I've focused on for a long period of time since I started in 2004, to try and establish linkages with a variety of other car builders that would eventually get us to hit this magic number of 6 million cars a year, which I've, on the back of an envelope, determined was sort of the right level of equilibrium for us to survive up and down cycles. And that progressed to the point where we started interfacing with Treasury, and we were offered the opportunity through the Obama administration to effectively become a significant shareholder of Chrysler and then carry out all the work that we've done since 2009 to 2013. Once that happened, Fiat was able to carry out a couple of acts of strategic purity, and sort of bifurcated its businesses, it spun off its industrial assets. So all the assets that made tractors and trucks and industrial engines were spun off into a separate organization, which is now listed in New York, and it's headquartered in Holland with a it's headquartered in London with a corporate residence in Holland, thanks to Commissioner Monti's rules on trans-European mergers, which allowed Fiat to exit the jurisdiction in an elegant way and effectively deal with a minority interest in the U.S. But that was done. That company now has a market cap which is in excess of Fiat, and it's doing well. And we were left with a suboptimal European and Latin American business through Fiat, and a U.S. business which was in dire need of a fix. If you thought that I had skeptics back in 2004 when I took on Fiat as a recovery story, I had even more skeptics thinking of people here in the U.S. thinking that we could fix Chrysler. Chrysler had been in the hands of Daimler since 1998. And through 11 years of management, I'd never been able to make a decent profit. And I remember a meeting with Dieter Zetsche, who was and still is the CEO of Daimler, and who had spent time in the U.S. running Chrysler. And I remember him telling me that he was just desperate to sell the business, and he was trying to unload it to anybody. So we found a solution through a company called Cerberus, which some of you know. It's a relatively large leverage buyout / PE outfit here in New York. They decided to undertake this restructuring of an American automotive icon, and they had never been in the car business either, so they reminded me of myself back in 2004, except that I had no illusions that I knew anything about making cars. So I learned it. I learned it the hard way by spending time with engineers and in the plants, they thought they had the solution. So I remember meeting with them back in 2008 and 2009, and I realized that they were going to take this thing nowhere. And Obama and his administration, the task force, realized that they were not going to do it either. And so we managed to get into this game, and we spent the first 12 months of the house being incredibly quiet and effectively cleansing Chrysler of all the bad habits that have been accumulated by the automotive maker here for the past decade. Nobody believed that we could do it, but we went quiet. We stopped incentivizing car sales. I mean, it was, we were selling cars below variable cost that are $1 above just to keep the industrial machine running. We stopped all that stuff. It was like being on a drinking binge, and we stopped drinking. And so factories went down. We lost a substantial amount of market share. We went down from double-digit market share in the US to about 6.5. And I remember getting calls from Treasury at the time saying, when is this going to turn? They lent us $7.5 billion. They were sort of long the position, and they kept on seeing month after month our market share drop. And I remember getting calls from Ratner saying, when is this going to turn? And I said, it will turn when it's right. And that's not really a good answer to tell your banker friend, right? I mean, the good thing about this, they didn't know what to do if I'd failed. And so I sort of stayed under the radar screen. We started making money within the first 12 months out of bankruptcy. Even though we were carrying an enormous debt load, it was true leverage. We had nothing. We had negative equity at the time. And we have rebuilt that business a piece at a time. Right? Month after month. Last month we had the 50th consecutive month of year-over-year sales gains in the U.S. We're the fastest retail, at retail level, we're the fastest car company in the U.S. And so the issue is, what the hell did you do? I mean, the guy was not an engineer who has some severe deficiencies in his resume by not having attended Bocconi. How could the schmuck at the end of the day come into the U.S. and effectively turn the car company around? Well, the reality is that it was done on a very simple basis. And I've talked about this at some length, and I know that the people who have asked me to speak tonight have asked me to address it to you. But this whole question about the value and the relevance of leadership in leading organizations. By the way, I don't know of a single CEO in the world who doesn't talk about this. Most bank CEOs talk about this. I'm not sure they understand what they're talking about, but they talk about it too. And so there is this issue about what constitutes the leader is a huge issue inside the Fiat Chrysler world. I'm flying back into Detroit tonight. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, we're starting what I call the American side of the mid-year review of talents and succession plans. I spend about 30 days out of the year, most of them on the weekends, but I spend 30 days out of the year evaluating probably between 1,500 and 2,000 people across the organization. We have 300,000 people on the car side and about 85 or 90,000 on the industrial side. But we spend a huge amount of time going through what I call the leadership ranks, whether they're sitting in leadership positions at a time or whether they've been identified as people with potential. We spend a huge amount of time dealing with them. And we effectively plan their careers. I spend a lot of time developing people. Because I live by a very simple rule. I learned this a long, long time ago. I happened to grow up in an academic environment. I ended up collecting 4 degrees. I'm a CPA and a lawyer and a bunch of other stuff. And now that I've got honorary degrees, I'm probably other stuff too. But I realized early enough in my career that the difference between successfully running an organization and failing had to do with culture. And it had to do with the way in which houses ran, what they believed their values were, whether the leadership was faithful to those values, whether it executed without violating those values. And so I started rethinking about what the hell it meant to be a great leader, because I know what I liked. I certainly didn't like people that looked like my clones. So, what is not allowed in my world is to wear black sweaters. You can do that on your own time. You just can't wear black sweaters when you come and see me. And I started worrying about and trying to understand what the right mix was. What do we look for in people? And I came to the conclusion there were two things that fundamentally mattered, and everything else was irrelevant. The first thing is that a great leader is capable of leading change. And it's not just, change for change's sake. It's the answer to one very simple question when you go home at night, and have you left the place in better shape than the way you found it in the morning? And you need to have that fixation. You need to be maniacal about asking that question to yourself every day. It's not incremental change, because incrementalism will kill you, right? That's why I don't believe in strategic plans. I know this is blasphemous to most of you. Because in Bocconi, they've taught you to do strategic plans, which is one of my reasons why I don't do them. I didn't go to Bocconi, so I really don't believe them. I don't believe them because I think the only thing you can do as a leader is indicate broad direction. Set some incredibly bold objectives and get out of the bloody way. Right? Surround yourself with the best possible people you can find and let them run. So when I talk about change, I'm talking about people that can actually execute change at that level. They can look at businesses and they can look at ways in which they can deconstruct it. Because if they don't, the market will take them out. The market is an incredibly unforgiving mechanism. It has zero conscience. It has no ethics. It just is. And so when you train leaders and you try and tell them that, do all your analysis, do all your Excel spreadsheets, do all the graphs, do all the regression analysis that you can, you have not prepared them for the fact that the very first time they come out, somebody is going to do something to them which is unexpected. Predictable competition is something of the past. And if you run your plans, if you run your business in a way in which your movements become predictable to the other guy, you're going to get done. So your house, your people, your organization must be able to move ahead of the curve. And that can't be one guy. It can't be the CEO who does this, right? You need to be able to surround yourself with people who see the world in a similar fashion. And so leading change is crucial, right? Bust the mechanism, move the sandbox away from the other guy. When you're a small guy in the business like Fiat was, playing in the same sandbox as Volkswagen would have meant my death. The only thing you had to do was step on my head and I would be gone. You probably wouldn't even notice. Well, now they notice because Fiat Chrysler is now the 7th largest car maker in the world. And we have made more money last year out of Chrysler than Daimler ever did while it was running it. So something fundamental has happened, something that's different. And the fundamental change has to do with the fact that all of our people, the senior leadership, the people that work for them, are driven by the same things that I'm driven by, which is the sole notion of providing discontinuity and change to the business model. Can't be planned, can't put it in a strat plan. You've got to execute this damn thing daily. And the other part of this, without which you're going to die, is that you got to be able to be a phenomenal leader of men and women. I didn't mean that to be a disrespectful thing. It's bad habits. It comes with age. But you've got to be able to more than motivate people, you've got to be able to lead them. And the leadership of people is an incredibly strange thing, because most people think that giving people directions is leading. It isn't. It has nothing to do with them, right? You got to somehow get to them. You got to get to their guts and turn them on. Because the single largest power of Chrysler today is its people. It's not my cars. Right? And technically anybody can make the cars that we sell. But nobody in the car business had the audacity back in 2011 to run a 2-minute Super Bowl commercial featuring Eminem and selling a car in which we had spent $75 million fixing, in which everybody hated before we changed its name from a Sebring to a Chrysler 200. And we sold more cars after that ad in 1 month than we had sold the whole Sebring in its whole year, the year before. Same car, different bumper. But that level of ingenuity, of the ability to grab things that are not obvious, to survive to the next stage, the new Chrysler 200, by the way, is now in the market. It's a real car. It's brand new. It started from scratch. But I needed time to build it. And we needed to survive between today and then. And the only thing that allowed us to do that was the fact that the number of people inside our house just felt absolutely free to break every bloody rule of convention that existed. But the fact that car companies don't run 2-minute commercials, that had never been run until 2011. Nobody had taken up 2 minutes of airtime on Super Bowl. That you don't use a singer of the caliber of Eminem to represent you. His choice of language from time to time leaves something to be desired. And remember, we did this at the same time that we still owed the government $7.5 billion. We did that in 2011. We ran Clint Eastwood the year after, Oprah. This year we've used Bob Dylan to present the Chrysler 200. And we've ran a 2-minute commercial on Maserati. For the first time in the history of the Maserati brand, we ran a 2-minute commercial for Maserati on the Super Bowl. All things which are outside the box. They have nothing to do with engineering. They have nothing to do with engine development. But they have to do with brand positioning and brand image. The rest of the industrial house is being run by industrial geeks. These are people that I spend a lot of time with, but I keep them away from the commercial side. They like Bob Dylan too, but they could never come up with a commercial in their life. They run combustion engines. They run assembly lines. And their metrics and their methodology has nothing to do with brand representation and brand positioning. So this segregation, this disassembly of the leadership side, the positioning of people in these roles, the fact that they can feel free within their own scope to run what they run is at the heart of Chrysler's success. Now, when you put it in those terms, it sounds pretty nice, right? One thing that I know they don't teach you at Bocconi, and these are my concluding remarks, is what happens in real life when you start running a business. One of the things that Fiat started a number of years ago, which we have introduced into Chrysler, is that we run a scholarship program for the kids of our employees. And people have to submit information and have to write an essay in the U.S. here to sort of merit consideration. And I did this on May the 6th. When we presented our 5-year plan to the financial community, to a number of you who are in the audience today. But I want to read you a letter that was written by a 16-year-old. I think she's 16. And she wrote a letter which is titled Hometown Girl. And it says, I'm a Detroiter, born and raised. The assembly line feeds me. The crowded classrooms taught me. The decay motivates me. In March of 1996, when I was barely walking, my mother started working at Chrysler's Jefferson North Assembly Plant. Once an honored student with dreams of law school, she found herself pregnant and homeless at 18. She took the job at Chrysler to avoid welfare and to create a childhood for me that differed from her own tumultuous upbringing. She made breakfast every morning. Chrysler fed us every day. She never returned to college, but worked hard to provide me with the tools to excel academically. For that, I'm eternally grateful. I was educated in the notorious Detroit public school system, I scored highly on standardized tests and often joined classes 2 or 3 years ahead. The number of gold stars was dull in comparison to the attacks waiting for me out on the schoolyard. I learned early on that a Detroit kid needed tough skin and a hungry mind. And crossing the city border, I was excited to leave behind the days where I was afraid to participate in a class in fear that I couldn't walk home in peace. Attending a private school in the suburbs came with a different set of problems. Classism and racism plagued the halls. On my very first day of school, I was asked if I'd ever been shot at and if I lived in the project. The summer before 12th grade, my 14-year-old cousin was arrested for car theft. He was like a brother to me. I helped him with his homework, and he taught me how to ride a bike. I never missed one of his football games, and he sat front row at each one of my spelling bees. In my escape to a better education, I neglected the people that needed me most. When I visited him in jail, he told me that I made it out there and there was no hope for him. After helplessly crying for weeks, I decided that I needed to act. So after a month experience in the Eastern District of Michigan's United States Attorney Office, I participated in a think tank for the Detroit Youth Violence Prevention Program and was recommended for a supervisor's position with the Detroit Junior Police Cadet Program. And that job eased my guilt for slighting my cousin and prevented others from facing the same fate. Currently, I'm continuing my education in Northwestern University, but I often worry about the cost of attendance and have chosen classes based on the prices of the books. However, I have my sights set on law school, and this scholarship would be a great help alleviating the cost to achieve that dream. I'm a Detroiter. A diligent plant worker taught me the importance of education and of goal setting. I learned self-reliance and perseverance. The city's ebb stimulated my desire for equity across racial and social economic conditions. I will be mayor one day. Detroit is who I am. The reason why I read you this letter is not because I'm trying to provoke emotions, but because when you end up in a leadership position, you'll be confronted with situations like this all the time. And so the question is, what is the third element of the stuff that we do? Why is this stuff important? The reason why it's important is because one of the unfortunate things that Bocconi doesn't teach you, I don't think, and I'm now going into no man's territory, but most traditional business schools don't teach you, is the fact that spreadsheet capitalism has failed as an art. And that all capital markets theory, at the end of the day, confronted with the reality of managing the human issues that you face as a leader, that combination just doesn't work. And so you got to be able to stay true to your values, and you got to recognize that your role in society, in what we do as leaders, goes beyond the question of making the numbers. There are ways and ways of making numbers, and then there is a way which is socially responsible of making them. FCA in its history, since I've been there, has never ever confused those issues. For those of you who live in Italy and who understand the Italian system know that we have taken some incredibly hard lines in terms of what we consider to be necessary changes to the way in which that system runs. But we've not shut down plants and we have not fired people. We've allowed the country to itself to adjust to this new system and effectively become an integral part of a much larger reality, which FCA is now. The purpose of all this, right, when you stand back, I'm going to step down doing this job sooner or later, because I do get tired. But when I do step down from this role, people worry about what they leave behind. I mean, what will be their legacy inside Fiat Chrysler? What will it be in the business side? I couldn't care less. Right? Not because of the fact that I'm arrogant or because I think that this thing is not worth much. Because the only thing that really matters are fundamentally two things. The first is, what the hell are they going to write on your tombstone? It's historical interest. You'd be dead. You won't know about it. Right? And I got that answer by sitting on the Treasury steps of one of the people that worked on the task force. Because this is a guy who was a Wall Street banker, and he made a whole pile of money, and I asked, and he went to work for incredibly poor wages in Washington, and I said, what the hell are you doing this for? He said, you could be milking some innocent client out of the banking sector. And he said, for one very simple reason, because when I die, I want them to write on my tombstone that I made a difference. And the other part of it is that your only true value as a leader, ultimately, is going to be measured by the quality of leaders that you leave behind. Not with whether you've created FCA, but whether your successors, whether the leadership class that you leave behind is of caliber. And so our plans, everything that we do, is a weird concoction of an insatiable, maniacal attention to stability and a desire to breed great leaders. All of this is done in a context which considers social responsibility to be a key. We could have made more money from time to time. We sacrificed that in order to achieve what I consider to be a better end. So for those of you who fall in love with spreadsheets and capitalism, be very careful. There are a bunch of human lives that are attached to every time you move a cell. And the most difficult thing for people who invest is to invest in a leadership class that is capable of making the distinction. That's all. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Thank you very much. I think there couldn't have been a better way to conclude this nice day than such an inspiring speech. I was really inspired. I must say I was also a bit relieved because I was planning to spend the next few months in the summer to work on the Bocconi strategic plan, and now I have a good argument. So I'll have a few words with my president and say whether we really need that.
Use me as a reference.
Right. I was also a bit touchy. I mean, that's something I take the opportunity to say. I mentioned that this morning. We launched last year this special project at Bocconi to attract students, young kids from very difficult social backgrounds. And we started last year with a small number of them. They come from very difficult situations. We actually searched them. I mean, it's not an application. We went and looked for them. We started from the suburbs of Milan, but we're planning to extend that. And I must say that I was really touched by the words that a colleague of mine who's actually here, Stefania Bianchi, was telling me, you wouldn't believe how they reacted when we offered them the possibility to come to Bocconi, because they were seeing Bocconi as a, say, elite institution, which we're not. And we're planning to expand this project in the next few years. And of course, I'm particularly grateful to those of you who helped us with this program. Now, Mr. Marchionne accepted to take a few questions, so I'm particularly grateful to him. By the way, he's always very generous to Bocconi. He was at Bocconi a month ago, addressing our students. I must say that...
I'm trying to make up my deficiencies.
Yeah. And... we were in a room which had a capacity of 300 students, but of course we ended up with more than double of that, and of course the temperature went up, and I was very much hoping that he could took off his famous sweater, but he did not, so the situation got very embarrassing.
Obama asked me whether, every time you see me I've been wearing it, he asked me whether I had anything else to wear, and I looked at him and I said, Mr. President, after the way you treated me, I couldn't afford anything else.
So the floor is yours. Any question for him?
Hello, yes. My name is Anthony Minara. I work for Intermonte. And my question is, you talked about being ahead of the curve. What do you think about what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla?
I think it's an overvalued ahead of the curve. I think he's done a great job. I actually, I tell you one simple thing. There's not a car company in the world in the top 7, and I include myself in that bunch, that could not have done what Musk did. The issue is that we didn't. Now I can give you a list of excuses as to why we didn't, as to why we didn't do it as well as he did. He's done a tremendous job. I just think his valuation is out of range. He trades better than farmers. I mean, at the end of the day, that's, unless you think he's got this magic trick up his sleeve. I think that's a competitive advantage that over time will be eroded. And so when you look at long-term sustainable stability and earnings, I don't see it. But he is a genius. He's done a tremendous job.
Do you think that Fiat will move towards electric cars as well?
We already have one, and I keep on encouraging people not to buy them. They are available in the U.S. We do sell a number in California. We lose $14,000 every time I sell one. So if you want to be my friend, don't.
Next question.
So this is actually a follow-up to that. Your comments about the electric car are quite popular right now and getting a lot of attention. What is the direction for fuel economy standards in the auto industry otherwise?
Look, I don't have a doubt that electrification in some form will come into the portfolio. We run some numbers. We do run numbers. We just don't call them strategic plans. We run some numbers on what the portfolio will look like by 2021, 2022, given where the EPA and CO2 standards are going to be. And there's not a hope in hell that we're going to make the numbers unless about half of our portfolio is going to move into a hybrid environment. So electrification will come. I just don't think you're going to be able to maintain the economic viability of the system without combustion being an irrelevant part. It doesn't work. Full electrification, apart from the disadvantages that it has in terms of range and the whole notion of the fear that people will carry with them about running out of juice. You can always go to a gas station and fill up your car. It's kind of hard to recharge your car in the middle of the interstate. Even if you solve the recharging problem, this whole question about standardization of processes makes this very, very difficult. Look, I spend hours, unfortunately, this is Mario's fault, because he comes out of Brussels. But we spend hours discussing with the Commission what the size and composition of the recharging plug is for electric vehicles in Europe. The French want it one way, the Germans want it another. The Italians are indifferent, as usual. It sops up a lot of our time, and it's not useful discussions, because the issue about recharging is a big, big issue, and the issue about longevity of batteries, and the technology is too fresh. And we've modeled and we've upscaled models in terms of battery production to find out where costs could potentially end up, and we're still miles away from where we need to be economically. So unless regulation as such pushes that change, you will not get there in a short period of time. I still think that combustion has a tremendous amount of reduction in CO2 and improvement in mileage to give over the next 4 or 5 years. So let's try and milk that cow before we go nuts on the other.
There. Yes, the microphone there.
Anybody have a microphone?
There.
She's coming.
Coming.
You just gave a speech about leadership, and I'm sure that many of the people in this room, you are an example for as a leader. This country, whether you like it or not, always had and has a leadership. And the last European election showed some kind of, not some kind of big disapproval by many of the European citizens, and probably that's the result of a lack of leadership for many years in Europe. Do you? I know you're not a politician, and I don't know if you're planning of. But still, a leader is a leader. Do you agree with me that Europe should address the leadership problem as soon as possible? And how Europe should address that problem, and then how Europe should address this anti-Europe that has been showed by the European elections earlier this year?
It's a tough question, so I'm going to try and skate on ice here before I start offending political leadership everywhere, which I've been known to do from time to time. But and I think Mario understands this fully well. He lived in that environment. I think a couple of broad observations about what happened in Europe. The first one is, I think what was reflected in the vote, and this connects back to your question about continuing membership in the European Union and the value of the euro, is that Europe, Brussels, the European Commission, Parliament, the extension of Europe as a governing body has fundamentally failed the voters. It has become, and this happened after Mario left. It failed the voters because fundamentally you cannot explain to most Europeans what their value is, what value added they're bringing to their lives, and they appear to be continuous. They appear to be in continuous regulation mode, and they keep on issuing regulation over regulation to try and get the sort of standardization and the creation of a single market in Europe at phenomenal cost. Europe is not the cheapest run house that I know. It's a pretty expensive set of institutions that somehow commingle to try and deliver a result. And I think there's a huge level of dissatisfaction with cost and output of that process. That's the first issue. The second one, which I think is probably more severe, is that what we have lived through, and I'm sure you've talked about this in your sessions today, is that we have lived through, and Mario has been part of this, we have lived through an incredible cycle here in the last 4 or 5 years, where the single strength of one country, Germany, has biased the European dialogue to the point where everybody was bound to assume shapes and forms which were unnatural given their history. And so what you're seeing now and have seen is a reaction of the wider, in my view, and the reaction of the wider population to a deeply rooted problem that reflects Europe's rejection of German dominance. And I say this with all due respect to my German friends. It has nothing to do with my competitiveness with German car makers, which is pretty deep. But it has to do with the fact that Europe is bigger than Germany, and I think that the collective ambition of Europe needs to go beyond German fixations. That doesn't mean that I don't agree, and as I have publicly with Mario, about the importance of discipline and rigor in the way in which we run our financial affairs, which has not been sort of the stellar quality of the Italian institutions for a number of years. But I think that issue by itself, the combination of those two, has caused a whiplash reaction, which has given rise to these numbers. Do I think we need proper leadership in Europe? Absolutely. I think that hopefully the new commission that comes in and the new president of the commission will reflect a completely different European view that will convince Europeans to rejoin with some degree of faith in the European project.
So I guess we have time for a final question, then we'll let him get his deserved dinner.
It's there. Only after I answer that question that I get one. Go on.
Down there is a question there. If you could bring the mic there.
Yeah.
Okay.
After that very easy question you just had to answer, I got a very difficult one for you. It's a multiple choice. You brought back, well, gas mileage, you got to worry about that. You brought back the Dodge Viper. Was that A, horsepower, B, torque, or C, because it has 10 cylinders?
It's horsepower. And 10 cylinders, we make 12, 14-cylinder engines in our world, so I'm not worried about the 10s. But no, look, the Viper is an iconic car. Do I think we hit it right out of the gate? No. I think the market has moved. I think what we saw coming out of Chevrolet and the Corvette is an indication of what that kind of caliber car needs to be. So, you know, the next phase of Viper is going to be it's going to take us a while, but we're going to get our act in order. And I think we need to start sharing architectures with Viper that have not been historically available within the Chrysler world. As you well know, the Viper is a standalone architecture. It's a tubular frame. It has a unique engine, which is only built for them. I think we need to rethink that car and probably access some of the architectures that are available within Alfa, Maserati, and Ferrari in some extent. So we'll see.
I do appreciate your passion to bring it back, though.
I think it's the right car for Americans to have. I think it's, but it'll never sell great numbers. But I think as an iconic representation of Dodge, it's perfect. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a sign of
I was hoping I get some indication of at least passing one course at Bocconi, no?
No, that's simply a medal of our centennial, just as a small sign of appreciation.
Thank you
you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to all of you.